We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott Cosenza. Now, earlier in the show, we've just been talking about the potential avenues that Judge Merchan in the Donald Trump 34 felony cases might take on September 16th. Will he allow the case to go forward to sentencing, or will he veer off down some different path? But let's assume for now, Scott, that he doesn't say...
By the way, just because you didn't say it, to me, it's the dividing line. This is the New York State criminal case against Trump rather than one of the federal or
one of the many
forever.
Others that are in
right.
existence or waiting in the wings, no doubt. So let's assume that Judge Merchan says, Donald, because I'm sure he calls him by his first name, Donald, we're going ahead with the sentencing. So what is that going to look like? Let's start with the very basics. Is it likely that Donald Trump will be in New York, Manhattan courtroom at that time?
Oh, yes, he definitely will be. Merchan has required his presence in the court. And if he were to be sentenced to custody, which is an option, a possibility, and I don't want to oversell it. I know we're going to talk about it more in depth. As you might imagine, it's a lot easier to take a person into custody for sentencing when they're in the courtroom rather than another jurisdiction entirely. So
I believe Dog the Bounty Hunter has Trump on speed dial anyway, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue there. So let's say Donald Trump's in the courtroom as per request. Obviously, there'll be a huge media...
no, you think there's going to be interest?
There'll be a huge media pool outside in which I suspect Donald Trump will speak before he goes in. And when he comes out, if he's allowed out, of course, that's one small option, of course. And so he'll be making political hay while that sun shines. But let's talk about now what could happen. What are the options here? You mentioned earlier in the show, Scott, that serious New York lawyers have intimated that this kind of crime would not carry a custodial sentence.
Intimated is one way to put it. Another way to put it is they say, and I've read multiple discussions about this by New York criminal practitioners, and what they say is for a person that does not have a prior criminal conviction, the likelihood that on these facts, on this kind of charge, and there's no direct analogous kind of thing that you can talk about because of who he is and what happened.
And let's point out that the actual felonies of which he's been convicted are a novel application as well.
These are novel applications of a paperwork law that law says if you file incorrect paperwork, that it's a felony because it's fraud on the public or something like that, who has a right to know. This was the mislabeling of the Stormy Daniels hush money payoff. So glad I got to use that hopefully one last time before those stories go away. But so instead of saying, hey, this was a payoff to silence this woman who was making these accusations, they said it was, well, now I forget maybe it said like consulting fees or something like that, but it doesn't matter. It was just not true, not strictly true. However, Mark, there was no accounting trick that somehow, it wasn't like they moved it from a non-tax deductible expense to a tax deductible expense, or some other financial shenanigans, or people who shouldn't have had to pay out for this. Like, it wasn't like Donald Trump's business partners had to pay, and he didn't do anything else except for, again, this was all to conceal the nature of this payout. And so that's why I think for a lot of us, it just seems like it's absolutely political and driven not by a search for justice or an application of facts to the law, but in an effort to get Donald Trump wherever possible.
Okay, so let's get to the questions that everybody, I guess everybody wants to know is what are the likely sentences here? And I think obviously we can't speculate too much because, as you say, it is there's nothing analogous to this that's ever really happened.
The only thing
So
I'm okay.
can I put together a small rubric and let's maybe discuss that? So let's
All
start
right.
with the the top end of the rubric. The most unlikely, I guess, is that Donald Trump is taken away to Rikers Island, him and his Secret Service team, and he has to serve a custodial sentence behind bars in the jumpsuit.
You
That's
know,
the
if
highly unlikely one.
if Judge Merchan is the 100% political actor that some think him to be, yeah, I really doubt that. There were many opportunities for the judge to lock Donald Trump up for contempt for violating certain orders that he imposed, and again, Judge Merchan did not do the most over-the-top anti-Trump thing possible in the moment during the trial.
Sure.
So he has a record of not going to the wall or to the mats, at every potential moment, to kind of get Trump.
Okay.
That's just, yeah. And by the way, and I was going to say that that's about the only thing I'm comfortable saying, in terms of predictions or whatever. It is just, I'm pretty confident Donald Trump is not going to be remanded to custody. Beyond that, what in terms of did you want to cut in?
Yes, please. So that means that the most likely scenario, and I think this is where everybody, based on my reading as well from, as you say, like New York criminal practitioners. I love that term, by the way, criminal practitioners. I practice crime. It's a great
Like
phrase.
the Saul Goodman line, right? You need a criminal lawyer.
Yes, you need a criminal lawyer. So there'll be some kind of punishment. Now, if it's not custodial, then that would perhaps go into the realms of financial penalties.
Money, absolutely, yeah. Money, restrictions on movement, confined to Trump Tower with a monitoring bracelet, having to call in, picking up trash along the highway. These are all sorts of things that a criminal defendant in the United States might face who doesn't have to be incarcerated, but has other impositions on their liberty.
Okay, so.
And also, by the way,
yeah.
I think I'm not licensed to practice law in New York State, and a lot of different rules are state by state. So but in many states, a judge could impose a criminal sentence and then delay or stay its implementation. So the judge might say, I sentence you to X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to stay the implementation of that sentence unless and until the federal courts, if your case hasn't been seen by a federal court by January 1, 2025, for instance, just some sort of thing like that. This is another, as long as we're speculating as to what might be done, that is also something that might be done.
Okay, yeah, that's actually pretty much what I figured. It'd be suspended until such time as appeals are dealt with, dismissed, or accepted. Now, how does this impact Donald Trump's ability to campaign? Because it seems to me that you mentioned that they're confined to Trump Tower with an ankle bracelet. We don't think that's going to happen because that would be seen as an impediment towards his run for the presidency.
Oh,
he wouldn't be able to
let me
move around.
I just want to add one little point to that. If it is something like that, like let's just say use that as an example, he's confined to Trump Tower with an ankle bracelet. They will be in federal court with an emergency petition that day, I would imagine. They probably have it already written, ready to go with some fill in the blanks. And I would expect a federal court to say, let's hold off on the implementation of this sentence until, second, third week in November here, at least. So that's
Certainly
something
not November 5th, right?
That's something that I would, it's baked into the cake that will, whether that court will grant it, I think they probably would, but they will certainly run to the appeals courts with anything that significantly impedes his ability to campaign for president.
Okay, and final question for you, Scott, just a very brief one, if I may. And this is not a legal question as such, maybe you are a political watcher, so I do want your take on this. Is there any scenario where whatever happens on the 18th, is damaging to Donald Trump among his base.
No, not among his base, but that's important, I think, as I am taught about the political goings on, and I have to accept the reality. It's swing state voters in swing states who will choose the next president of the United States, and not me or anybody else who doesn't live in a swing state and is a swing state voter within that state, Mark. But it seems to me like your average person who's not tuned in to see a person who's been criminally convicted is generally a negative around that person's, reputation and character. So,
Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest today, longtime host of this here radio show, Tim Donner, and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in each and every week. You are appreciated.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.